All right, well, thanks again for everyone joining us this evening. And we will go ahead and get started with our workshop. So let's go ahead and move on to the next slide. So welcome everyone to the City of Napa's virtual community workshop on redistricting. We're so glad that you joined us this evening, and we're excited to have this conversation with you tonight. So next slide. Tonight's workshop does have live interpretation available in the Spanish channel in addition to the English channel. And no matter which language you prefer, you will want to go ahead and select that channel through the translation button. And that's the button that looks like a little globe on your Zoom window. So all you need to do is click on the English or Spanish option, and you'll be in the channel that you prefer. And so I'll turn it over to Elizabeth to share in Spanish how to access the Spanish channel.
Good evening. I'm going to be giving these instructions in Spanish. Vamos a estar usando la función de Zoom después que termine este anuncio. Si está usando una computadora, en el fondo de la pantalla escoge el icono de mundo y ahí va a escoger español. Si tiene un tableta o un teléfono, va a localizar el menú de 3 puntos al fondo, el derecho de la pantalla, y va a escoger la idioma español. Y si tiene alguna pregunta, póngalo en las preguntas y yo le voy a traducir y voy a avisar que necesita ayuda. Okay, ready for Spanish. I'm going to the Spanish channel. You're on mute.
Oh, sorry about that. Thank you, Elizabeth. As I was saying, just please note that this meeting is being recorded, and a recording in both English and Spanish will be posted to the city's redistricting webpage. And moving on to introductions, my name is Jennifer Nentwig. I'm a director with Trepepi Smith. I'm your facilitator here tonight and also part of the team assisting Napa with outreach about this important issue. Here with us tonight, we also have Sophia Garcia from Redistricting Partners, the demography firm working with the City of Napa. Sophia, would you like to say hi and share anything else about yourself?
Sure. Hi, everyone. Good evening. I'm happy to be here. And this is a presentation in a space where we're here to listen to any members of the public. So we're looking forward to any comments after the presentation.
Awesome. Thanks, Sophia. And lastly, Tiffany Carranza, your Napa City Clerk, is joining us tonight and may chime in the event any city-specific questions come up during our Q&A sections. And Tiffany, would you like to say hi and share anything before we get started?
Yes, thank you so much, Jen. I did just want to take a moment to thank both yourself and your partners behind the scenes from Trepepi Smith for facilitating this workshop for us this evening. And also, of course, to Sophia from Redistricting Partners as well. And a quick moment to thank our community members for participating and being involved in this process. And I, as Jen mentioned, I am available in the background as well, and we'll be sure to hopefully get some questions answered this evening. So thank you.
Perfect. So we can move on to the next slide. Okay, and next, covering the goals this evening, we'll talk a little bit about what we're hoping to accomplish here tonight. So through the redistricting process and events like tonight's workshop, we are going to learn from the experts, particularly Sophia, who you just met, who is our expert in demography. And we know that this is a complex process, so it really is an opportunity to educate and explain to the public what this process is and why it's so important. Then once we've shared information on how this process works, it's important for the experts to hear from you, members of the community. And it's important for the experts to hear from members of the community because you really know your communities best. And effective redistricting relies on you identifying the neighborhoods and communities that should be kept together when redrawing district lines. And then last but not least, our goal is that you're empowered to give effective feedback. So by absorbing the content that we'll be sharing here tonight, by talking with your friends and neighbors, those are all great ways to participate and provide effective feedback to inform the process that will determine Napa's district lines for the next 10 years. So next slide. Next, let's address the question why you should care. So fundamentally, democracy just works better when people are engaged. Being engaged means you're aware of the issues and weighing in on the important matters that factor into how your city is run. Second, there are things that you just know best about your communities, and it's essential that those of us involved in the process hear from you. And lastly, this is a once in a decade opportunity since the census data is released every 10 years. So every 10 years, cities like Napa get together and talk about demography and your district lines. And it's just exciting to be at this stage with you now working through this process. So next slide. Here on this slide, you can see the community workshops that the city of Napa has planned for this process. And we're here today at the January 6th virtual workshop, obviously. So you can see that there are 4 more opportunities to participate in workshops coming up on January 15th and January 30th. And we will be covering these dates once again later on in the workshop tonight too. So next slide. Here you can see the public hearing scheduled for Napa's redistricting process. So Napa has already held its first and second hearings, and you can see that the next hearing coming up is January 25th. And we've actually heard that the city of Napa will be transitioning that meeting to be held via Zoom rather than in person. So please stay tuned for those Zoom details to be coming out from the city. And next, I'll turn it over to Sophia to take the upcoming slides from here. Thanks.
Thank you, Jennifer, and thank you, team. Today, there's a couple of things we're going to cover. We'll talk about the redistricting basics, review redistricting for the city. We know that you just went through this process, but as Jennifer noted, we have to go through it every 10 years when we get that new data. So we'll talk more about that. We'll review the traditional redistricting principles, which are the principles we use for any draft plan and the principles we use to evaluate any community plan that is submitted. But the bulk of this will be talking about communities of interest, talking about that concept more in depth, and then also just giving you an opportunity to be able to be here and ask any questions of staff, of myself, or any other members of the team. We'll do a map tool demonstration, and then we'll talk more about different ways that you can give your testimony, your communities of interest testimony beyond attending a hearing. And then we'll review the hearing schedule again as a reminder, because we know, if you're here, you really want to get involved. So we'll remind you where that is. So we'll go to the next slide, please. So redistricting is the process that occurs every 10 years. And it's the process of adjusting district lines after the release of the US Census data. Some of the most well-known examples, and folks are really paying attention to the process at the state level. So in California, an independent redistricting commission is the one who decides and votes on final plans for our congressional and state legislative lines. And we know that's different throughout the country, but here in California, we have that commission. And even though this slide does say you adjust lines every 10 years, we know that the city of Napa went through this process last year, but we have to go through the process again because we got that new census data. So the process last year was based on 2010 census data, and now we have to relook at the lines again based on the 2020 census data. And so this will occur every decade after the release of the census. And we receive the data and every year ending in a 1. Normally, we would have received it at the end of March of 2021, but due to the pandemic, due to the census being pushed back so folks can fill it out, and the Bureau then needing time to reevaluate the data, we didn't receive it until the end of September. And that is pretty historic because normally we would have had a lot more time to do so. But thankfully, your city has an extended time, so it's given us more time for outreach and be able to hear and have this presentation. Another thing that is important for redistricting, that beyond creating districts of equal population and reevaluating that, redistricting also serves to empower local communities and preserve voting rights. So it is really a historic thing to be a part of because it does occur once a decade. So go to the next slide, please. So the redistricting criteria that will follow, and this is specifically under the Fair Maps Act, which is a new California-based redistricting law If you'd like to read the full bill, you can go and Google AB 849. So that's the number of it, and it'll pop up. But in California, it is being referred to as the Fair Maps Act. And it is a mandate for cities and counties in the state of California to follow, and gives a more robust principles and requirements to follow, all in the name of transparency and for allowing the public to have more of an opportunity to be a part of this process. And so the criteria that we're following for the city is that we are creating districts of substantially equal size. And so there's a lot of weight in this first criteria, because it's the reason that we're redistricting and had to wait for that data. It is also the criteria that lets us know that we have to have a total plan deviation of 10%. And so the city is not mandated to have districts of exactly equal size. You have some room to have districts that are a little bit less populated, a little bit more populated, in order to look at all of the other criteria, to consider communities, to consider neighborhoods, to consider other types of requirements, or just the way that residents of the city of Napa move through the city. It's also the criteria that lets us know that we are talking about the total count of people, not citizens. So we are looking at those who filled out the 2020 census file. And so we're not looking at citizenship or voter data. It is that total count. And this criteria as well, it is also talking about, when we talk about census data, we're synonymously talking about census geography. And a lot of folks in California may be familiar with census tracts, which are the largest unit of census geography that we receive from the Bureau. And for redistricting purposes, because there's a lot of things that could change or move, we use the smallest unit of geography, which is the census block level. And we'll see what those look like when we do the districtor demo. So it is all census data, but because we're moving some streets and looking at communities, we do use that smallest block level data. And because of that, we don't split census blocks, because in this criteria too, we're following that census data. So quite a bit of weight in that first criteria, but it's really important and something we'll have to follow. The other criteria is to create districts that are contiguous. So they geographically need to touch one another. We do know that you have some unincorporated areas in your city. And so we will be also looking at that, but around those unincorporated areas, we have to make sure that those pieces are contiguous and touching one another. Maintaining communities of interest, we have a couple of slides on that a little bit later in the presentation, and a big reason why we're here this evening and why we want to continue to hear from the public. And another criteria that the city can look at is to follow easily identifiable lines, so highways or street names, or any other additional government lines. So if there's city neighborhood lines, or any other additional government data that the city or the public would like to look at, that's something that's allowable as well. And then finally, to create districts that are compact, and this can be in a couple of ways. So does it appear to be a shape that we're familiar with, or functionally, does it make sense to have a border be, again, a highway, a park, or another big geographical feature? So these are the criteria that we will be following and mandated to follow under that new law. And we'll go to the next slide, please. And we'll then go to the next slide. We're going to highlight those communities of interest now. So communities of interest is one of those terms we only hear about once a decade. So for you all, you may have heard about it last year because you went through this process again, transitioning to district-based elections. We can also hear it referred to as COIs, so capital C, capital O, capital I. And what it's meaning at its core is that it's the opportunity in redistricting to uplift the narrative of communities, to remind ourselves that you all are the experts of your community. Jennifer had a wonderful slide, talking about the importance of this process and community involvement. And communities of interest in this criteria is your opportunity, and again, is our reminder to listen to folks. And again, that's why we're here. It's about bringing like-minded people together for representation, and they really are the building blocks of districts. So we try to, look at that first criteria of relatively equal size, but then try to build the districts around communities of interest that we hear coming forward. They can include ethnic and language minorities and a lot of other groups, and we have another slide giving you some examples. But as a reminder, because we are talking about how people relate to the city and communities of interest, you don't need census data. It could be your experience of the city and how you relate to it. These can be very subjective. So we may hear two competing communities of interest or passionate testimony from folks and how they relate to the city council and how it governs. And so it's a good reminder to ourselves at Redistricting Partners, staff, and members of the public to remain open-ended and as inclusive as possible as we're listening to folks. And they, we can listen to a lot of other people's narratives on this piece. Some communities that are covered under the Voting Rights Act specifically are Latinos, Asians, and African Americans. But if we go to the next slide, there's a really important thing that we have to remember is that while communities of interest may include race, it cannot be the predominant factor in drawing district boundaries unless legal counsel has directed us to do so. And that would be because we are invoking Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act, but that we haven't been given that direction right now. So it can be something we consider. It's something we can look at, but again, it can't be the main reason that we draw districts. And we have some questions for you to think through if right now you're thinking of, I really identify with my race as my community of interest, and we have some thought questions to get you to another point to think of additional characteristics so that we can consider that as well. So we'll go to the next slide, please. So there's such a variety of communities of interest, again, that we can hear. And we've heard a lot of these and other jurisdictions across the state and the country. So that could be historical communities, tourism areas. It could be languages spoken at home. Neighborhoods is a big one that we hear referred to. School districts can be another boundary, or homeowners versus renters. That's also one that could be a competing community of interest. And so there's such a variety with how folks kind of see their involvement with the city council and their involvement with their city. So we welcome all of these. We're here to listen. So we'll go to the next slide, please. On that, there's also some communities of interest that were disallowed from being considered a part of this process. This is another piece that is outlined in the Fair Maps Act, that law that we talked a bit about. So in addition to having those criteria, in addition to having a website up and having a more transparent process, the city is disallowed from considering political party affiliation, incumbency, and political candidates as a community of interest for the process. So what that means is that we do understand that it is the rights of residents to speak to those who represent you, but it's also the job of the city council to follow state and federal law. So if a member of the public comes forward and gives testimony that is centered around one of these three criteria, the city and us at Redistricting Partners will be disallowed from utilizing that testimony for this process. So that's just something to keep in mind. It is something that is new. So this law does change a lot of things that have happened during any redistricting cycle before, even the one that occurred last year. Another thing that is good to consider for this process as you're coming forward and thinking of the testimony that you want to come forward with, communities of interest that are citywide are difficult to consider for this process because we are talking about redistricting. So we're talking about having your city be in 4 districts, not an at-large system. And so if someone comes forward and says the entire city of Napa is my community of interest, that's wonderful that you relate to your city like that. That's wonderful to see and hear, but it's not as helpful because we are in the process of, again, having those 4 districts. So if you think about that, this is an also really wonderful thing to bring up, is that you can have multiple communities of interest. You don't just have to come forward with one. So we implore you to think of different areas of the city that you relate to, neighborhoods, or different pockets for the process. So again, things to keep in mind when you're going to give your testimony. So we'll go to the next slide, please. These are the kind of questions I was alluding to earlier, specifically when you are thinking about race as your community of interest. Again, that is something we can consider, but that can't be the main reason we draw a district. And so these are some questions, and there's additional ones later on in the presentation that are here to sort of help you and guide you as you come forward for your testimony. So the first one is to ask and think about, does the community have a shared culture, characteristic, or bond? So again, if we're thinking of this in terms of race, what things additionally beyond race? So is there restaurants you frequent, languages spoken at home, parks that you frequent, festivities, certain areas of town? And again, it could be a wide variety of communities. The second one is to ask, what is the geographic nature of your community? Can it be mapped? So of course, if you're submitting a paper map or using Districtor, we can see the geography that you're talking about, and that's fantastic. And we want to be able to capture that and utilize this for the process. But this one is really important, specifically if you're only going to give verbal or written testimony. So if you're only coming forward with writing an email or sending a letter or coming forward in a meeting to give verbal testimony, it's really helpful if you give a specific street name, specific neighborhood names, or a specific address, because we don't want to misinterpret what you're saying, and we want to be able to capture your piece for the council and for this process. So this one is really helpful for us so that we're able to utilize it for the process. The third one is to think about your community's relationship with the jurisdiction and how it is affected by policy decisions. So this means thinking about your relationship to the city council. So what is your relationship to the City Council of Napa? Are you currently split between two districts? Are you currently united? What are the benefits or negative effects of your specific community if it is united or split? And so this one is going to the question of representation and reminding us that redistricting is also about representation as well. So we have some questions here. There's also a survey online on your website where you'll be able to look at these questions as well. So we'll go to the next slide, please. So the next couple of slides, it's like a little quiz, interactive. So I can see a couple of you. So I don't know if anyone wants to turn their camera on, you can unmute yourself or be interactive, or if you want to just nod with yourself, that's great. Okay, so we're here for you for this evening. So and again, some of these, if we may have answered them in the earlier presentation, but if you want to just stay silent, that's okay too.
Yeah, and I'll keep my eyes peeled for any raised hands and can unmute folks. So
Great.
we can do that too.
So the first one is a group of renters who live downtown testified to the city. So would this be considered as a community of interest? So do renters make sense as a community of interest for the city of Napa? And again, this is talked about a little bit. So we'll go to the next slide. So if you're thinking to yourself, yes, you're correct. This is definitely a group of residents that can easily be mapped. They're in a distinct area. They share common policy interests. So renter interests are different than homeowner interests. Again, we saw that on a previous slide, but that could be a big difference. And their concerns could be addressed through legislation or public services. So we also see renters makes a lot of sense for a ton of jurisdictions in terms of redistricting. So definitely some renters could come forward if they'd like. I will go to the next slide. So the next one is a part of town that has a historic nature, either as a former hub of business, community, or as an area that has had been discriminated against through redlining or racially restricted covenants. So should the city or could the city prioritize historical areas? So again, that we're thinking of historical areas as either like an old downtown or as historical areas in terms of redlining. So there is quite a difference here or just law of opportunity. But what do folks think? We know this one, again, is pretty different from renters, but this serves to show you just the difference that folks can come forward with.
Give folks a couple seconds and see if anybody wants to raise their hand and chime in. All right, I think we can just cover the answer, Sophia.
And we'll go to the next slide. Yes, so historical communities and areas with historic discrimination can and should be recognized as a community of interest when drawing maps. We also, if we've seen and utilized old redlining maps in other jurisdictions. So if there's not a map that exists in a digital format, we can draw that. And again, this kind of highlights that piece of looking at additional government data or any other additional lines. So definitely this could be considered as a community of interest. So we'll go to the next slide. So this is a little different. Again, we're giving you a variety to kind of just discuss this topic of communities of interest because we know it can be a little abstract. So we're trying to bring it with examples for you that folks can come forward with. So this example asks a statewide group for people who are fans of the San Francisco Giants testify to the city. Does this make sense as a community of interest? So fans of the Giants, or you can insert your baseball league team in here if you don't like the Giants. So
Any sports fans participating tonight who want to
I
chime in?
don't know. Like attending sports things in person, but not as much watching them on TV, but we know there's a difference. And so we'll go to the next slide. This one is a little bit of a trick question, but no, this doesn't necessarily make sense in terms of testimony for a redistricting process. It's important that communities of interest are distinct. You could have Giants fans all across the country, and this one overlaps in a lot of geography, and it's unlikely that any governing agency has any say over this issue. So there's no one saying you must be a Giants fan or you must be a Dodgers fan. But we can think about this one in a little bit of a different way. So let's say there was an adult baseball recreation league who would like to see an improvement or a more investment in public parks. Let's say they want to see more lights or water fountains or a dog park adjacent to the baseball park. And they come forward to the city in this redistricting space as a community of interest. That can make sense. Or anyone who's kind of a group that's looking for improvement of city services could definitely make sense for the city, but not necessarily fans of a baseball league. So we'll go to the next slide, please. So here's another just kind of questions here for you to think through your communities of interest. This is something that you can access, definitely after this presentation. This will be online on the website. The PowerPoint slides are also online on the website. So great kind of page to screenshot and talk to your friends about. And so it asks you who's a part of your community. What are some meaningful places your community recognizes or gathers? What are some common concerns you share as a group? And again, common concerns about like your city, the services, anything you'd like to see changed or highlight as a good job that the council is doing. What are some common cultural characteristics that unite you as a community? What are common work-related traits that bring a community together? And what is significant about the physical space? And so these are, again, wonderful kind of thought questions in addition to those three that we had before the little quiz. And all of your thoughts and testimony, whether it's verbal or written, will be a part of the record. And I do see Jennifer is unmuted herself. So if you'd like to chime in on this piece, definitely welcome that.
Yeah, thank you so much, Sophia. I would just pause on this slide and see, I know it's a lot that you've covered and it's a ton of good information for us all to digest and think about. If anyone does have initial thoughts or feedback that they would be interested in sharing tonight, we can give people the opportunity to raise their hands. So as our participants are thinking about that, Just a reminder, as Sophia mentioned, there is a form online where you can go to the webpage that we'll be sharing later on in the slides and put your input there as well. But I do see a question in our Q&A. In terms of equal population, does each district have to be under 10% deviation? And does the total deviation have to be under 10%? And how is that calculated?
Yes.
So could you take the first part of that for now, Sophia?
Yes, yeah, and if any staff or folks would like to chime in, each district does have to be under 10% because mathematically you have to have a total planned deviation of 10% as a total. So every district has to be below 10% away from zero. And we get the total planned deviation by adding the difference between the most populated and the least populated district. So that has to be within 10%.
Okay, and then our participant had a second part of that question. So they noted that the total deviation of the map adopted last time based on 2010 census data, the deviation was 7.6%. So could you elaborate a little bit on why that is so important and its impact on voting rights?
That it's under the 10%?
Mhm.
Yes, so we have that as a rule and something we have to follow to ensure that no one district is too large, overpopulated or underpopulated. So let's say hypothetically there was a city of 100,000 and you have one district that was 80,000 people and one that is 10,000 people, then the district that has 10,000 people hypothetically has a louder voice and has more opportunity to talk with their elected officials versus the one with 80,000. So it's all about sort of thinking about representation and thinking about making sure that all the districts are relatively equal. So all of them have more of an opportunity to elect someone who represents them as a community and also has the opportunity to have more opportunity to be able to work with their council person. It is relatively equal for local governments because we have all of those other criteria that they can look at and include as part of the process. It's different in, for instance, for congressional lines, they have a deviation of one person. So that has to be, every district can only be the difference of one person, but for local governments, there is that difference to allow for cities and counties to look at additional factors.
That makes sense. Thanks, Sophia. And then the participant actually elaborated the deviation is 7.6% now with 2020 data. So I don't know if you would happen to recall from the last process what the percentage deviation was with 2010 data.
I'll have to look at it. I think we have it on a file.
Oh,
or I
it
don't
looks
know
like
if-
Tiffany has that
I was
information.
gonna
So
say if a
I'm
staff member
going to
does.
see while we're discussing, I will see if I can find it from our website. So just give me a moment. I'm having some internet difficulties, but I will see if I can pull it up right now.
fantastic. Thanks, Tiffany.
And just as a kind of an elaboration more on that, because we know the city did redistrict last year, they did use 2010 data, but even looking at those districts now with 2020 data, it does fall within that 10%. So the city could pass the lines that they adopted last year, because again, it is within that 10%. But we do know that the city is going through this process. There's a lot of meetings and we're listening to input. But again, because it's under that 10% and they had a lot of input last time, it could be passed. And we are seeing that with other jurisdictions as well, whether there's a minimal change or if the lines are within that 10%, they can pass them as is. That is allowable.
Okay, and then I actually see a raised hand from a participant. So Amy, I'm going to ask you to unmute. Okay, are you able to speak, Amy?
actually, those were all my questions that you answered. So
Oh,
thank you.
perfect.
I raised my hand and then I typed the question. So thank you.
That works great. Thank you. Any other questions from any of our participants? Or Tiffany, do you have information?
I do. I'm looking at the ordinance that was, excuse me. I'm looking at the ordinance that was adopted, and it does show here the population of each district is substantially equal with an estimated population deviation of 9.3%. So our deviation actually decreased with the 2020 census data.
Awesome. That is great to know. All right. Well, any other questions or feedback on communities of interest for now? All right. I'm not seeing any other raised hands at the moment, so we can move on to the next slide. And this again just highlights that community of interest form that Sophia mentioned earlier as well. So in case you are still thinking about those communities of interest and didn't have a chance to share feedback tonight, you can keep thinking about those and visit Napa's redistricting website. It is cityofnapa.org/redistricting. And under the Redistricting 2020 Communities of Interest tab, you can find that online form and submit your input. And then I will turn it back to you, Sophia, from here.
Great. And we love that people are unmuting and asking questions. This is why we're here, and it's here to answer any things that you guys have. So in terms of map submissions and additional ways that folks can submit testimony, there's two different types of submissions that we're looking for. There's the community of interest map submissions, which you can do again as a paper format or using the online districtor. And then the other map submission is district-based plan map submissions. So folks again can use districtor or that placemat to draw district-based plans, and you can submit a full plan or a partial plan, and both are available to you as options and ones that we are looking for as we continue through the process. And we'll go to the next slide, please. We've been alluding to districtor a lot, and this is the link that you can use to be able to access it. It's also online on the City of Napa redistricting website. Again, under the Fair Maps Act, the City of Napa has to maintain a redistricting specific website for 10 years. And this is recorded. This will be maintained for 10 years. So if you are missing the redistricting process in 2028, you can go back to this presentation in this meeting and say hi to yourself. So there is that wonderful website that has all of the information. It's a really wonderful resource, and you can find that link there. Districtor is an online mapping platform that is based out of Tufts University in Massachusetts. And a lot of jurisdictions across the state are utilizing this tool for redistricting input. And because of that, it's really important that you use this specific City of Napa districtor link. We know that the county and the Board of Education are also using districtors. So again, we want to make sure that you are submitting your City of Napa districtor map. And so that way we'll be able to capture it, and we monitor that site for any new submissions. So please use this specific link. And again, you can find it here on the presentation or on the website, which we will show you. So we'll go to the next slide, please. And those placemats. So there are a paper, a large laminated paper that you can draw your map with. I don't have a Napa specific one, but they're about this size. So large enough to eat off of, which I do sometimes actually. And you can draw that, but please make sure that you take a photo, send it in to staff because we want to be able to capture the work that you've done. And if you just hang it up on your wall and don't send it to us, we won't be able to, get your submission. So we want to make sure that folks can get that. And Jennifer or Tiffany, do you know if what's the best email or way that folks can send that in or send a photo or even hand it in person? If we want to just talk about that, if folks are wanting to get their hands on that map too and submit it.
I can speak to the email address and then Tiffany can share anything else, but I do know that the email address redistricting@cityofnapa.org is the best organizational email address. So anything you would add on to that, Tiffany?
I would confirm, and then our website does have links to a PDF version and an online, districtor. So hopefully all the resources are there that you would need. But yes, redistricting@cityofnapa.org.
Great, wonderful. So we'll go to the next slide, please. And were we going to do is pause and do the tool demonstration now or wait till after we were? Okay, wonderful.
Yeah, let's do it now.
So we'll pause and I can share my screen. Move that. Move some things around. Okay. Okay. Can you see my screen? Great. So I like to kind of start with navigating from the redistricting website so that folks can find that link. So here is your City of Napa redistricting website. And the tab you're going to want to go to is draw a map. And right at the top is the districtor link. There's also a demo, a video for how to use this too. So if you want to go back and either again revisit this video or go to the one that's there on the website. So we're going to click on this districtor link and it's going to take us directly to the City of Napa districtor link. Did you want me to go through both the community of interest districtor and the district drawing or just do one? I can do either way.
I think both would be great. We've talked about both during the slides already today.
Okay, wonderful. So before we get to that, we'll just talk a little bit more on the homepage and what we have here for districtors. So there's some background information on the tool and a little bit more about redistricting itself. There's a section to draw your map. And so we have those two different maps that we were talking about. So the community of interest map and the district-based map. So you can submit both if you'd like. There's a public gallery that will show all of the public submissions that have been submitted. And it's really wonderful to see some here already. And folks too can add your own name to the map, and each map will also receive a unique ID. And so we'll go through how to name it. But regardless if anyone submits a name or not, there will be an ID that we'll be able to reference. And so if we keep scrolling down, there are also a space for any draft maps or work in progress maps. And let's see if there's any here. There is one. So there you do have a space to do a draft if you'd like to come back. There's also a space to tell you a little bit more about redistricting partners and the data that we're using on Districtor. So we at Redistricting Partners have been working and collaborating with Districtor to make sure that the data is correct and you have your specific city information there as well. And because we did mention and know that Napa and other jurisdictions are utilizing Districtor as well, you can easily go to any of the other jurisdictions to submit a map. But we're here to talk about the City of Napa. So we're going to scroll back up and we're going to go and show you how to draw a community of interest based map first. And we'll walk through both of these. So you're going to click on that orange button. And what it said is to draw a community of interest built out of 2020 blocks. And so that's what we were referencing to for that first criteria of utilizing census block data. And so that's going to be the base of both of the plans. Again, it's tied to census data and we're using that smallest geography. And that's what we can see automatically, which are the gray geographies within the city. Those are the census blocks. It may not be something that you're so familiar with and maybe think of, oh, I live in, census block number this, census block number that is across the street. We know a lot of folks don't think in that way. So we have it here for you. On the top left, you have the ability to insert a specific location and the map will zoom you to that location. You can zoom in and zoom out using the plus and minus button. And then you can also reorient your map pointing north on the left. So there's a couple things on the left, but the bulk of the work that you're going to do in both of the community of interest map and the district-based map will be over here on the right side. First, we'll go over these 4 buttons and then we'll play around as an example. Again, just as a note, this is an example. I'm not submitting a community of interest map, and in no way am I trying to advocate for a specific place, purely example purposes. So the first button here is the hand tool or the pan tool, which if you click using your mouse, you'll be able to move around, also zoom in and zoom out. So a lot of folks are familiar with those functions. You have the draw tool, which if we click on that, will be the way that we'll be able to draw the community of interest maps, and you can change the brush size to grab more census blocks, or if you're being really meticulous, you can do 1 by 1. You have the erase tool, which is what it sounds like. You can erase any of the census blocks, and similar to the draw tool, you can have a large eraser, or again, do it 1 by 1. The final button that we'll cover right now is the inspection tool, which if you hover over a specific census block, will give you the total population of that block and also the ethnic breakdown of that specific block. So if you're curious about the amount of people in your block, you can go ahead and click that button. So we're going to go back to the paintbrush tool. And again, just do an example. So I'm going to zoom in a little bit more so folks on your computer can see better. So we want to start drawing a community of interest. You just click away. So you can click 1 by 1, or you can click and then drag your mouse to be able to grab other census blocks. And as we've said throughout the presentation, you have the ability to submit multiple communities of interest. You don't have to just submit one. You can if you'd like, but you have the opportunity to do more. So to add another community of interest, you click add another color, which is the plus button over here. It's going to automatically change your color. And now we have the opportunity to draw another census block or another community of interest. Something that's a little bit different from the districtor-based tool, which we'll see in a little bit, is you have the ability to overlap your communities of interest. So here we see there is a green portion between our yellow and blue. It's not going to show up as its own color. Districtor gives you the opportunity, because we know that some communities of interest can overlap with one another, may have similarities, and so you have the space to talk about that. So we're going to add one more just so we have some more color up here, and then we're going to go into the other functions. So, and it's also a pretty teal color. You also have the opportunity to lock already drawn districts. So let's say I'm really happy with this blue district over here, and I don't want to be able to overlap with it. So you can lock that district so it we'll make sure that we don't change that. So at any point in time while you're doing your community of interest map, you have the ability to name your specific community of interest. And this is also different from the district-based tool. In the community of interest-based tool, you have the opportunity to add additional context to explain more why you drew a community of interest the way you did. You don't have the ability in the district-based tool. And so we'll talk a little bit about ways that you can come forward with more testimony and description describing your map. But here I'm going to change the color of the first one, the blue one. I'm going to click on the community in the drop down. I'm going to go to name. I'm going to name this again something generic. And then you can add a lot of description about your specific community of interest in this box called describe this community. You can also add specific important places, so specific locations. Again, it could be a school, a specific park. And you do that by clicking this blue button with the pin drop, and you click on it, and now you have a plus sign, and you can click a specific point. To add another point, similar to pressing the add color, you just click the button again, and now we're going to click another point. And so you'll see one of the differences with the new places tool is that all of the dots will be red. So whether you add 1 or 20, all of them are going to be red. And so you have the opportunity as well to name them by figuring out which one is which, because selection, it just gives us the new point and then the number. I can't remember the the order I drew them. So I'm going to hover over the point. So I have new point 2 here, new point 3, and new point 1. Let's say I'm going to rename new point 2. I'm going to go to the selection, click new point 2, and I'm going to say this is a dog park. I don't know if it's a dog park, but I have a dog and I can sort of see a lot of parks as being dog parks. So in my head, it's a dog park. I'm going to name it that. And again, I can name the rest of these if I'd like. To erase a specific point, so let's say I don't really want this here on my map. This is new point 3. So I'm going to select new point 3, and then I'm going to click this delete button, and it's going to go away. So it is a little bit different with how you erase your communities of interest. So now we'll talk about some other tabs. So you can also number your communities of interest if you'd like, if that's something important to you. And we also have additional data here, so we can see, and I'm going to zoom out a little bit just to see the city as a whole. So we can show the total population of the residents, and we can also look at total population based on ethnicity. And we can also look at the citizen voting age population data set. And this is the data set that we would utilize if we were drawing a Section 2 district. And this is folks who are over the age of 18. So again, I did note that we're not using voter registration data, and we're simply for this data set looking at residents who are over that age of 18 or voting age. And so that's called citizen voting age population data set. You can also create a coalition district by clicking on multiple of these ethnicities, and then a coalition builder district will show up if you go back to show population and then click coalition population district. So there is quite a few things that you can look at, but again, just as a reminder for community of interest submission or map, you don't need additional government data. It's just there if you'd like to look at it. The final tab is the evaluation tab, which will give you the total count of people in your communities of interest. So for our work community of interest, we have 5,460 people. And it'll also give you that information compared to the city as a whole. And it will give you the ethnic breakdown of your community of interest as well. And again, you don't need this data to submit a community of interest. It's purely here for additional information. And you could look at those based on your different communities of interest you've created. So you've done a lot of work and you're excited to submit it to the city. So we're going to click on this save button, and up will pop a new window where we'll be able to share our map directly to that gallery, which you will go to share now. You can name it if you'd like here in this space, and then click this button, share to gallery, and it will automatically be added to that gallery along with the other public submissions that we've seen. Or you can click work in progress, and then now it will be saved as a draft under that work in progress phase where we saw that one map that was a draft map. You can also clipboard your specific URL of this map and then add it and look at it in another computer. But again, the best way to submit your map and make sure that the city is able to view it would be to share now and share directly to the gallery. You can as well, so the last button is the top right button, which will allow you to print your map as a PDF, or if you'd like to look at it in another mapping software such as Maptitude or Esri, you can download this as a GeoJSON and then look at it in another software and add another data to that if you'd like. So you do have that ability as well. So that's all the information for the community of interest map. And so we're going to go back to the home page and we're going to review the district-based plan. And we're going to see there's a lot of similarities between the one that we just demoed. So to draw a and that's my dog in the background. So perks of working from home. And so we're going to draw a district-based plan. We went back to the home page, and now I'm going to click on this purple button. And now we'll be able to draw a district. So we do see there's a lot of similarities. We can see those census blocks. We see the outline of the city, but we do see some differences. So now the background is a light gray, and we no longer have that search bar. We still do have the ability to zoom in, zoom out, and orient our map pointing north. And we still have all of these same buttons of the pan tool, the draw tool, erase tool, and the inspection tool. But there's some obvious differences. So we no longer have that ability to specifically add any additional information to these districts. So what we've been letting folks know is that once you submit a map, a district-based plan, and the best way to add additional information is to use that email address, add additional information referring to your map, or to attend one of these meetings and let folks know, I'm the author of this map. This is the ID number, the name. Here's more information on how I drew it. So if you'd like to submit additional information, those are wonderful ways to do so. So we're going to go back to the paintbrush tool and let you know just the slight differences of this tool. So we do see automatically that there's only 4 colors and there's not that add another color button. And that's because there's 4 districts in the city of Napa, and that's all you're going to be able to draw. You can submit a plan that only has less than 4, but you can only go up to 4 districts. So here's an example of, again, just for example purposes, I'm going to grab some of these census blocks. And the biggest thing here is that we see this number being populated automatically as I'm drawing a blue district. The line in the middle represents what is called the ideal district population number, which is 19,853.5. And so what this is that if we were to make exactly equal districts, that would be the number of people per a district. But again, the city doesn't necessarily have to do exactly equal districts. They have that deviation of that 10%. We see all of the unassigned population here. So if you want to submit a full draft plan, this is a number to keep an eye on. So you want it to be as close to 0 as possible. Districtor will give you the max population of your district. So it will only give you the number of your largest district. It's not going to give you that total plan deviation. We at Redistricting Partners will take down all of these submissions, run it through our database, and then be able to present an atlas with all of the total plan deviation of your full plan. And then the last button here is it'll highlight any unassigned areas. So this one's great if you're trying to create or submit a full draft plan. To click on this button, you can see that everything's been unassigned. So we're just going to go through and add another color so that we can see kind of what it looks like to have more districts on this map. And so again, it's highlighted and changed in real time to give us the population of that district. This one's a little bit over, and we can see that because it went over the line. So we'll go through the data layers and the evaluation, which again are similar to the community of interest map. So we have the same ability to number the districts. We have the same ability to show the total population of your district, and again, based on race. And we can look at the citizen voting age population data as well. Same with the coalition builder. The evaluation tab, now instead of giving us the names of our communities of interest, we have it numbered, and we can compare our different districts based on different ethnicities, as well. And again, this is something you can look at. It's something we can look at as a community of interest, but again, we're not allowed at the moment to draw it solely based on race. So, and you also have the ability to submit a partial plan. And what that means is it's a plan that has less than 4 districts. You're welcome to do that, or you can submit a full plan. So similar to the community of interest district-based plan, you go to save, you can name it, you can save it automatically to the gallery, or you can save it as a draft, or you can clip it here with your URL link. Again, just as a note, the best way to ensure that your map will be considered as part of the record is to share it to that gallery. If you just don't save it or share it, then we won't be able to look at all of the wonderful work that you've done. So we want to make sure that we have a copy, staff has a copy, and also that it's able to go on that website for 10 years. And again, the final button is that you can print it as a PDF, or you can export it to look at it in another plan. So we know that was a lot that we threw at you, but this is being recorded. And there is a recording on the website as well. So you're welcome to go back to these. We went step by step, but we do know if you're sitting down to submit a full plan, there's a lot of other stuff that you want to think about. So that's the districtor drawing tool, and I'll stop sharing my screen and give it back to Jennifer. I can't really see everyone, so I don't know if there's any questions, but I'll give it back to you and can share again if folks have questions.
Perfect. Yeah, thank you, Sophia. That was a lot of good information and such a useful tool. So now we do want to open it up for question and answers and see if anyone joining us here tonight has questions about the mapping tools or questions about anything else that's been covered here tonight. So I'll give folks a couple seconds and see if anyone raises their hand. So one question, going back to the mapping tool, I think you mentioned that the districts can be numbered using Districtor. Can the districts be renumbered in terms of the number of the district that they are, that the city refers them to or refers to them as?
In Districtor, yes, the numbering is based on which the blue district and how you started that. So this one will always be District 1 wherever you draw it. So whether it's referencing the District 1 that is current for the city of Napa or not, it's just based on the color and the one that you decided to use first. But the numbering is up to the council, and normally without it moving in a redistricting system, and there's not a major change to the existing lines, then the numbering does stay the same. The council can elect to renumber if they'd like, but again, that only kind of happens most often when folks initially move from an at-large system to a districted system.
Okay, that makes sense. And then following up on another thing I think you mentioned during your demonstration, is it possible for a city like Napa to increase the number of city council districts through a process like this redistricting process?
It is possible. That would have to be done during this process, and the council. It's also based on the charter, and again, I think legal counsel would maybe be the ones to come forward and comment on this. But sometimes it would have to be based on a vote by the city. But when folks move from an at-large to a districted system, there's a lot more discussion in that space on how many districts there would have to be. But yeah, I haven't read your charter, so I'm not sure if they can. And we see Tiffany has been unmuted, so I think that, yeah, would like a staff.
I will, without having legal counsel present, I don't want to answer incorrectly, but I do know there is a deeper, we are a charter city, and there are some other parameters that we'd have to follow. And this did briefly come up last during the transition to districts. And we did not, and I do not believe would consider changing in the future. I know there's more to the answer that could be dived into, with potential legal assistance. But yes, I think while it could be possible, it would be quite a different process. So,
thank you, Tiffany.
Perfect. And so I think for whoever asked that question, the short answer is that for the purposes of this process and where the city is at with it now, they're really only accepting suggestions for 4 district maps.
Correct. Yeah.
Okay. And then circling back to something you mentioned earlier in the presentation, can you describe a little bit more about why the census data was so late in this process this time around?
Yeah, that's a great question. And we know a lot of folks, ourselves and our firm included, we're waiting for it. So normally the census data is released every March ending in a 1. We did receive the American Community Survey data, which is that CVAP data, in February of 2021. And that's a different data set. That's an estimated population data set that is on a rolling average. But for the point in time count census data, because the Bureau extended the amount of time that people could submit their survey, that extended the amount of time that the Bureau needed to review the data, look for any abnormalities. And then here in California, for our redistricting cycle, we are using what is called the prisoner adjusted population data. So what that means is that here in California, the statewide database, which is at UC Berkeley, takes the data from the Bureau, that point and count population, and places our incarcerated population, which are in the state prisons, to their last known address. And so what this does is it allows for more equitable redistricting, and will move that incarcerated population to their last known address instead of counting them as being in the state prison. And so if you are a jurisdiction that doesn't have a state prison, you may not see a lot of movement in your population, but we definitely have seen there is a big change for those areas that do have state prisons in their population as a part of their population. And so because of, and again, COVID and safety measures and the extending time to allow for folks to fill out their survey, we received the data in late September. So it's about 6 months that was waiting and lag time for receiving that data. And so there's a huge crunch to be able to compress a lot of the redistricting timeline for jurisdictions who had a December 15th timeline. So there's a lot of counties and cities in the state and across the country that were just had so much work to do in that short period. But it is because of the pandemic and safety measures and the Bureau needing time to process that we didn't receive it. We received it so late, which is unprecedented, which is I think not the only time where the data was late was like in the, I'll have to check, but like early 1900s. But normally, you know, we get it in March and have a much more time to process.
I was just going to say unprecedented, but you beat me to it.
Which is something, a word we have heard a lot. We're like, oh, everything seems to be that way. So yeah, life is very different than it was in early 2020.
Mm-hmm. So one more question coming in. Why are we in Napa redistricting already when we just adopted districts last year?
Correct. That's a great question. And I think I'll tackle some of that, but I do know Tiffany was extensively a part of that process. But in last year, the move, and I think maybe Tiffany, I'll just punt this to her because I'm sure she's gotten this question a lot, is a wonderful response to it. So I'll punt to her.
Well, Jen, will you repeat? It's just, why do we have to do this again so soon?
Right.
So short answer is that, yes, we just adopted our maps in, it was May of 2020. That was based on the 2010 census data. So because of the new rollout of the 2020 data, we were required to go through the redistricting process in order to utilize the new data for the new districts.
So even though the processes are so close together, the data is actually 10 years separated.
Correct.
And you had to do that because of a lawsuit or someone coming forward?
Correct. Yep. And we, lucky for us or unlucky for us, I'm not sure which way you look at it, we also followed really the Fair Maps Act guidelines back in 2020. So that enabled us to kind of have a solid set of lines going into this process as well. So I think there may need to be some changes, but we have been receiving some feedback that the current lines are acceptable, as well as you can see from the results of the current deviation. So yeah.
Correct. And on that note, under the Fair Maps Act 2, cities and counties cannot redistrict mid-decade unless there's been a population shift that is 25% of the total of that jurisdiction. And it would only be a redistricting if there was an increase of that population or if a lawsuit came forward. So, we're not looking to do this to get a lawsuit. And if there's a big population shift, then we can revisit, but under the Fair Maps Act 2, they can't redistrict just because they want to for this process. And Tiffany did mention redistricting is based on decennial census data. So if there is a jurisdiction that would have to redistrict for a lawsuit mid-decade, you'd have to use the latest decennial census file, and that's mandated federally. So we have to use that regardless. So even though, again, as Tiffany noted, they did it just 2 years ago, they had to use the 2010 census data, even though they were in 2020. So that is, again, a great question. And I think that's one that I'm sure Tiffany and staff have gotten a lot. They had such an involved process and wonderful process 2 years ago, but we're here again so, to help you.
Awesome. Thanks, Tiffany. Thanks, Sophia. And then going back to you, Sophia, could you share some more specific examples of communities of interest that you're seeing other communities share in this process?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a great question. Some of the ones that we hear a lot from are neighborhoods or neighborhood boundaries, and that's one that often cities will have as a file that we can consider. Another one for community college districts, let's say our school district lines. So that's something that's really important to them and tied to them. And we've also seen a number of community organizations come forward and saying, the neighborhood lines aren't necessarily how we see our neighborhood. And then they'll come forward and say, these are our boundaries. This is what we see as our community. So it's been a variety of, here, look at city data and city lines, and then also how we relate to our community. Some folks too have asked to look at renter data or homeowner data, so we can look at that additional data to be added to a map. But oftentimes it's, please consider this street or look at my larger area as a community. And we can definitely look at those and add those to the maps and add those to the draft descriptions as they come forward.
Okay, and I'm seeing one last question pop up for now. Who has the final say on the adopted map for the city of Napa?
Yes, so for the city, it is done by your council. So your council is the one that has the final adoption. I did mention earlier that here in California, an independent commission is in charge of congressional and state legislative lines. And so we have seen a couple of commissions across the state. But if a city has not gone through the process to have an independent commission, then the council is the one that will do the final adoption. And that is the instance for your city here. So they will be the ones who have the final vote on the plan.
Sounds good. And they'll be informed by all of the public input and the draft map submitted by the public. So definitely important for everyone to participate. Okay, so I'll give it a few more seconds and see if any other attendees have any other questions or feedback. All right, I'm not seeing any at the moment, so we can move on to the next slide. So before we wrap up, I do want to go over the timeline one more time and revisit some additional opportunities coming up to participate. So remember here, you can see that there are 4 additional workshops coming up on January 15th and January 30th. So as you go forward from this workshop and maybe start practicing with the tools, we'd invite you to come back to another workshop and share any additional feedback or have your questions answered. And of course, we'd love for you to spread the word with your friends and family members and encourage them to participate as well. And next slide. And then here again, you can see the hearings coming up. And just remember that the January 25th hearing is the next event, and it will be conducted via Zoom. So on this slide, it is still showing as in person, but the city announced that it'll take place virtually because of the current COVID surge, and the city will be putting out those Zoom details shortly. And next slide. So as we wrap up tonight, I want to emphasize again how community members can continue to engage in the process. So here on this slide, you can see a screenshot and the URL of the city's redistricting website. And you can also use a shortened URL, which is just cityofnapa.org/redistricting. And there you can find additional information, meeting materials for all the workshops and hearings, including recordings of events like this workshop here tonight in both English and Spanish. You'll see the draft maps when they become available, links to the tools that were demonstrated here tonight, that community of interest forum we talked about. So lots of great resources and even more that we haven't touched on. You can also send an email anytime by emailing redistricting@cityofnapa.org. And on behalf of the City of Napa, I just want to thank everyone for joining to share your feedback and to learn about how you can continue participating in the redistricting process. We hope to see you again at our upcoming redistricting events as the process moves forward. So thanks again and enjoy the rest of your evening.